So now I'm going to tell you the story of yarn. All right, my friends. So now sit back and let me regale you with the story of yarn so far. So I started working at the Unitarian Universalist Society of San Francisco in 2015. Um, it was my job title then and now was the young adult coordinator. And when I was hired, I was essentially told to figure out how to do my job. Now, while I had some ideas from my predecessor, and my supervisor, the Reverend Allison Jacks, has been an incredibly amazing supervisor. There was really no person or source I could go to and consult on how to do this work, on how to create Unitarian Universalist Young Adult Ministry. So instead, I relied on the years of experience I had accumulated doing event work. I can say I had been a part of planning and putting on over 1,000 events in my life. Festivals, concerts, music halls, parties, weddings, corporate events, you name it, I've worked it, basically. Many times, in fact. And in addition, I spent years as a youth and in my emerging adult years, that's 18 to 24 for those who don't know, working on cons, the weekend retreats that are really popular in our YRUU youth programs. And I helped start a middle school version of that as well as a young adult version. So I used all my experience from these various careers and volunteer lines of work that I'd done, and I threw the kitchen sink at the wall. I did many different kinds of events. I organized as many opportunities as I could, and it took a few years, a whole lot of trial and error, and I began to see what did and did not work. So, for example, small group programs like Becoming Together work. Random volunteer opportunities don't work. Casual events for socializing work. Strongly structured outings don't really work. Classes with a registration and a sliding scale and a good teacher, that works. Drop in, drop out style classes, they don't. Co-organizing events with essential ministries. Think of if there's we have a major homeless ministry here in San Francisco, or our worship for that matter. Doing that works. Co-organizing events with ministries largely attended by an older population, it doesn't really work. And when I say work and doesn't work, what I'm saying is, does it actually speak to and meet the needs of young adults or not? And in the cases of where things work, it's like small groups, people want that. They make connections. Casual outings are just fun, and too much structure can kill an outing. But a class, like a well organized class, really speaks to people, whereas one that's casual doesn't. And look, all love to our older population, but it doesn't work to try to just mix the two younger and older adults without a really thoughtful experience. So I don't doubt that much of what I learned wasn't known already. It's unlikely I discovered anything new. The issue, though, is that, again, there was no source or person I could go to consult about all this, to teach. And that's a large part of why I created Yarn, is I wanted to pass on all the knowledge I learned. So, fast forward to November 2018, and I got hired onto a second position at the Unitarian Universalist Society of San Francisco. It's now called the Ministerial Assistant position, and basically I do administration and coordination. I manage a lot of things from behind the scenes. Now that I worked at UUSF, though, full time, because I had these two part-time positions, one 15 hours a week, one about 20, my labor was now undivided. I didn't have to have a second job in another industry or field. I could exclusively focus on working with Unitarian Universalists and on the movement. And so that's when I started trying to figure out, what can I do to support people? So in early 2019, I applied for a grant to the UU funding program run out of the Shelter Rock congregation in New York. Sorry if I'm pretty sure that's right. And this was for a project I called the Young Adult Ministry Initiative. The goal of this project was to initiate a conversation about young adult ministry. What happened? Why does it no longer exist? Where did things go? There used to be a national program, right? Nothing's going on now. Why do I feel so alone doing this work? Fortunately, the EU funding program saw the value of this and gave us an $8,000 grant to start Yammy. And so at General Assembly 2019, I put the word out, and two daring souls responded to the call: Jamie Dougherty and Yvonne Marcou. Jamie has done a lot of our graphic design work. That logo you see at the yarn ball, that's Jamie. But Yvonne has been my real partner in crime, the one who, from the beginning, understood the scope and scale of what Yammy could be, and has been a co-founder and a real part just with me every step of the way. So, in her own words, Yvonne's going to tell you why she got involved.
I've always been interested in creating UU communities. I was one of those youths who lived and breathed UUism in high school. Then I bridged, and it all disappeared. I spent some time trying to make young adult ministries work in various facets of my life, but had reached a point where I was done trying on my own. I just didn't have it in me anymore. Then I found Joe's video looking for collaborators and starting UU Young Adult Work. Faced with the prospect of building something with others who were equally enthusiastic, I jumped at the opportunity.
Thanks, Yvonne. So, at first, the three of us didn't really know what we were doing, but we knew we had to start figuring it out. And that's what the point of the money was. So we announced Yammy in August 2019 with a young adult led Sunday service. It was the first one in San Francisco in a very long time and is now a yearly tradition, one I'm very happy we finally got started. We created a website and a Facebook page, and I started a monthly newsletter that acted as a roundup of UU Young Adult Ministry opportunities. And we started granularly reaching out to young adult ministry leaders to see if we could start building some kind of community and fellowship amongst people who do this kind of work, whether as professionals or lay people. Now, it was slow going at first. We looked for anything we could find that would give us that would indicate the leader of a young adult group or ministry, and we tried to connect with that person. Unsurprisingly, the data we were finding was really unreliable. Inactive Facebook groups, outdated web pages, old newsletters, lots of dead links. And the few we did talk to, most were either lay leaders who could barely make time and space for their group, or older staff people who had young adult ministry in their portfolio of work but weren't really doing anything. So then, like every story these days, pandemic starts. March 2020 comes along, our shelter-in-place world sets in, and so we suddenly find ourselves asking, what can Yammy do to support you young adults during an unprecedented global viral pandemic? So the first thing I started doing was meeting regularly with the Reverend Stevie Carmody, the Emerging Adult Associate at the UUA, and Casey Stainsby, the Youth and Young Adult Ministry Programs and Events Coordinator at the Canadian Unitarian Council. We used our meeting to coordinate opportunities and get the word out. So then, a friend reached out to me with an audacious idea. See, I had actually been planning to organize another Young Adult Con in March 2020, but it was canceled for the obvious reasons. So a couple weeks later, in April, someone who was planning to attend that con reached out to me and said, hey, what if we did the con online? And I was just like, oh, well, duh. That's obviously what we need to do. And so on May 9th, we organized the first Conline. It was the first ever online young adult conference that we know of. Over 40 young adults joined us in worship to touch base and learn from each other and just be with each other while we were entering this new world. It was truly a breakthrough moment for Yami because we finally had a large group of you young adults together who wanted ministry. And we delivered. It was amazing. So, June 2020 comes along. A lot happened. So, I want to do my best to summarize this and let you all know what's going on. So, the UUA's Commission on Institutional Change final report comes in. Now, it's a really thick, dense volume, and I encourage you all to read it because it lays bare how white supremacy culture exists within Unitarian Universalism. But I want to highlight a particular line on page 37, which states, "A tragic and indefensible fact is that we have not reinstated our national youth leadership and young adult program." Let me say this again. A tragic and indefensible fact is that we have not reinstated our national youth leadership and young adult program. This information was both elating and infuriating. Remember, Yami was started to answer the question and initiate a conversation. What's going on with that young adult ministry? We had an answer. Oh my God, this is amazing. Having an answer to your question that you set out to. It's so clearly and forcefully articulated. Fantastic. And this answer is utterly, it's just a shocking, infuriating tragedy. The UUA, from our understanding, during the financial crisis between 2008 and 2011, defunded these programs. It spun off the young adult programs into their own entities and then didn't support them in any capacity. No resources, no financing, nothing. They sent them off to die, and they did die. None of these programs exist anymore. We literally have access to the documents where these spun-off programs formally closed. In addition, they promised to reinstate these programs, and they didn't. We're aware of people who said, I was there when Bill Sinkford promised to reinstate this program. And they didn't. This is infuriating. I could yell at you, yell for the rest of this workshop about how enraging these facts are. I mean, even on a practical level, this is insane. Young adult ministry, young adult programs are leadership development tools. This was a part of the UUA's leadership development pipeline. It's how you took youth, powerful youth, and gave them experiences so that they could become the future leaders of Unitarian Universalism. And they destroyed it. They shot themselves in the foot, the UUA did. And hurt thousands of people. Not only the folks who had been a part of these programs that loved them, but those of us like me who, when they were looking for them, had nothing. I literally had to start Yami because there was no other national program. Okay? It took someone crazy enough like me to come along and be like, F it, I'm going to start my own thing and just start glomming everything onto it in the absence of the UUA. We filled the void. Now, another thing happened. So, last year's youth and young adult staff for General Assembly resigned en masse. It's a really complicated story, but basically I'm going to give you the shortest version I can. So the youth and young adult staff, which let's keep in mind, this is really the only national level programs the UUA has for youth and young adults. They walked off the job last year to protest poor compensation, unreasonable expectations, and a lack of input in the overall process of planning GA. Now, I want to be clear, I don't envy the organizers of last year's event. But the structural problems of how GA are made were exacerbated by the shift to all online programming, to the point where these staff could no longer tolerate the work conditions they were expected to operate inside of. And so they quit. So these two events, the report and the information in it, and the youth and young adult quitting GA staff illustrate and lay bare how utterly broken our national institution's relationship is with its young adult community. Like, very few of us respect and take the word of the UUA seriously because of just the litany of events that have caused us to suffer their choices. People who weren't young adults made these choices, and they impacted us in really negative ways. And the matter is not complete. And that is one of the great things we have to work on. So, I know that was really heavy, y'all. So thank you for bearing with me. Fortunately, the story gets better from here. So, June 2020 comes along, and these two reports come. This report comes out, the GA staff quit. At General Assembly, a responsive resolution was drafted and passed that called for renewed investment in youth and young adult ministry. Now, I want to be clear. We discovered since then that a very similar resolution, a report came out in 2008 that said we need to invest in youth and young adult ministry, and a responsive resolution was passed at GA. So this is not the first time we've done this as a community. We saw this problem, and we know what to do to address it, spend more money on it. But last time, nothing happened. Fortunately, this time is different, because this time we have yarn. And in July 2020 last year, 17 UU young adults came together to develop the successor project to YAMI, the Young Adult Revival Network. Remember, YAMI was designed to initiate a conversation, and it did. We succeeded. But that was always the end goal. So there had to be something that came next. And thus we created YARN, which is no less than an audacious effort to rebuild the continental Unitarian Universalist young adult community. And it hasn't even been a year. I have to remind myself all the time, this project is not even a year old, and it has exploded. It is out of control in a lot of ways, in all the best possible ways.